Right, guys. There we go. Right, so we're in the midst of a series called Stripped of Context, lecture number 5, looking at some of the most well-known passages from the Bible that are regularly ripped or stripped from their context. And you can't do a series on stripped of context without addressing what I regard as the granddaddy of them all. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Lecture 5 of Stripped of Context. So let's jump in. So the scripture that we're going to look at is, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measures you use, it will be measured to you. These are arguably the most well-known and most quoted words of Jesus, and almost always they are ripped or stripped from their context and quoted in a way that Jesus, I don't think, intended it for it to be quoted. And you will even hear people who are not followers of Jesus quoting these words. And what happens in our culture as it relates to these words of Jesus, essentially, we say, well, unless somebody else is perfect, you don't have a right to speak into my life. And since none of us are perfect, well, nobody has the right to speak into my life, because at some level, we are all hypocrites. And Jesus is going to speak about hypocrisy in this passage, and we'll see it in just a moment. But really, we take these words out of context because at the end of the day, we just don't want anybody telling us what to do. And Jesus says, well, don't judge, or you too will be judged. Hey, they just seem to work so well together, but is that what Jesus is really saying? Because when you look into the Gospels, you will see Jesus telling his disciple things like, if your brother sins against you, you go and show him his fault. Or in Luke chapter 17, if your brother sins, rebuke him. So apparently, in the kingdom of Christ, disciples' sin is something that we name and address in relationship. So it's like, wait a second, if you do not judge, or you too will be judged, how do you hold that intention with, hey, in the kingdom of Christ, disciples, we address sin, we confront sin? How do those two things fit together? And so we've got to dig into Matthew chapter 7 and understand the context behind the words that Jesus used. And if you understand the literary context, so remember again those different lenses that we've used before. I've sent it to you as part of the notes. We're going to be looking primarily into the literary context of Matthew chapter 7. What you are going to find is that Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and 7 are part of the Sermon on the Mount. And at the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is speaking with his disciples, and they have left everything to come and follow him. Other people are also following him, and Jesus is about to tell them, hey, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to live like I live, here are the things that you need to do. And before he launches into the heart of the sermon, he's going to say to them, I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, after Jesus says these words, he's going to launch into all of these different facets of life. He's going to talk about things like anger. He's going to talk about things like lust and oath and fasting and prayer. And as he discusses those things, he's going to first point out the conventional righteousness, like the typical religious teaching of the day of the Pharisee or of the teachers of the law. But then he's going to go on to show how that conventional righteousness turns into on itself. In other words, it's a vicious circle that doesn't actually realize as a kind of transformation that God intends for us through the law or the prophets, or the law and the prophets. And then he's going to go one step further and he's going to say, hey, guys, if you are my disciples, You don't want to get caught in this vicious cycle. And here's how you need to live differently so that you reflect a righteousness that is deeper and surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. In other words, he's saying the teachers of the law think they're righteous, but the problem is that they've sort of locked themselves within the law, within the Torah. And so it's all about religion and it's not about a relationship. The guys who come to the Hill Church will know what I'm talking about. We remember we spoke about it as pertaining to one of the core values of our church. So Jesus is saying it's not about religion, it's about relationship. And if you just make it about religion and you think that you're righteous because of religion, you're going to find yourself in this vicious cycle. Okay. Any questions so far, guys? No. Okay. So this is what Jesus is going to do. And before we dig into the depth of that, we've got to understand that this passage about do not judge all hinges on the meaning of the word judge. And it is this Greek word, krino, and it has a range of meaning. And one of those is to separate or to make a distinction or to exercise judgment. Now, there are just going to be times in our lives when we have to decide, is this or is that? Is this person trustworthy or not? Is this a good deal or is it not? In fact, sometimes when we have to make a decision and we don't have a lot of time to gather the pertinent information, we often find ourselves saying, well, I've made a judgment call. I didn't have time to gather, so I just kind of had to go with my gut. I made a judgment call. And this is using that word krino in the Greek. And this is just part and parcel of living as a disciple of Jesus. We have to exercise judgment. We have to be wise about decision making. In fact, a few chapters later in Matthew, Jesus tells the disciples, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as the snakes and as innocent as doves. We're going to have this capacity for discernment, for subtlety, for nuance. And I think we all understand that exercising judgment is not the same as passing judgment. And this is the second meaning of this word krino, is to pass judgment or to condemn. Now, condemnation is different than looking at somebody's life and saying, hey, I don't think that's good. I don't think that's the best. I think you might want to reconsider that. Condemnation is actually putting yourself almost in God's place to judge someone else as unworthy because there's something in their life that you find objectionable. And this kind of condemnation is so crippling. Dallas Willard, a modern day theologian, he passed away a few years ago, but he was still one of the modern day theologians in America. He says this: when we condemn another, we really communicate that he or she is in some deep and just possibly irredeemable way, bad as a whole, and to be rejected. I don't know if you agree with that. Sorry, let me just see. I can't even see the top of the slide. Sorry. There you go. So I don't know if you have ever felt that sense of condemnation, but there are few things in human relationship that can leave you feeling as isolated and cut off from people as condemnation. And so Jesus is going to go on to give this famous illustration to express why his disciples are really not allowed to engage in condemnation. And he says, imagine that there is somebody who has a speck in the eye, and you want to help get that speck out of the eye. And this word for speck is really just meaning like a little stalk or a small twig or even like a piece of chaff. It's something really, really small. And you want to help get it out, but the problem is you have this beam in your eye, and he's talking like this huge structural beam. So think about construction here, and Jesus is saying he's actually being really, really funny here. He's being comical. His word pictures would have made his audience laugh. You almost have to imagine somebody walking around with this giant log hanging out of their face, and every time they turn around, they're sort of knocking people in the face, knocking stuff off the shelf. And they are the ones that want to help you to deal with your small issue in your life, that little twig in your eye or that little speck in your eye. And the point of this illustration is that you can't help somebody remove the speck in the eyes because your vision is impaired. In other words, if you are engaging in condemnation, you are not seeing like Jesus is seeing. And that is really the point that Jesus is trying to make with that illustration. And this is deeply, deeply human. In fact, few scholars put it perfectly by saying human beings possess an inbred productivity to mix ignorance of themselves with arrogance towards others. This is just so deep in us to hold ourselves in the best possible light, but to view others in the worst possible light. And so if you succeed, it's because you got lucky. But if I succeed, it's because I worked hard. But if you fail, it's because you were irresponsible or you weren't really ready for the opportunity. But if I fail, it's because somebody was out to get me, or I just didn't catch didn't catch a break. We just have this incredible double standard as human beings. And this is exactly what Jesus was exposing in his teaching about judgment. He goes on to say, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, this word hypocrite is from the Greek word hypokrates, and it just means like a mask. It's a reference to acting in a theater. And in Jesus' day, this was not a word that has the same meaning that it does in our days. If you went to the theater, you saw an actor, you were really moved or compelled by the job that they did, you might say to them, wow, you are a phenomenal hypocrite. I don't think he will be happy to get that kind of remark or compliment. It's actually Jesus who is responsible for taking that word and giving it to us with the meaning that we now associate it with, as somebody who presents one thing to the world when it's actually there's something else, the true behind the mask. And if you think about the way they used to visually portray a theater, would be one mask happy, the other mask sad, and that's where the Hippocrates came from, or hypocrite. And Jesus says, when you condemn other people, you're engaging in hypocrisy because you don't see like I see. You don't see like Jesus sees. Any questions or observations so far, guys?
No, I don't have, Lukai.
Okay, all right. Now, this was notorious in the religious culture that Jesus was a part of. In fact, in Matthew 23, is pretty much all devoted to Jesus calling out the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And he says it like this. He says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You like whitewashed tombs on the outside, which looks beautiful, but on the inside are full of dead men, bones, and everything unclean. So what Jesus does in his teaching, he's saying, well, here's how the Pharisees and the teachers of the law do this. They condemn others, but the problem they run into is this vicious cycle that they get caught in, is that they are actually guilty of the same thing. Okay, and that's where the hypocrisy, the double face part comes in. And so, what is the deep righteousness that he's going to call his disciples to? It's going to be to deal with their own beam. In other words, first confront what's broken in you. Essentially, what Jesus is saying, hey, no, you don't get caught in this vicious cycle of condemning, thinking you are better than them, or being double-faced, being a hypocrite when you are guilty of the same thing. You focus on you. And there's really interesting thing that happens when you sit with Jesus in the presence of your condemnation of others. And I mean that literally, that as followers of Jesus, sometimes we need to imagine ourselves sitting at a table across from Jesus. And we just sort of plop a condemnation of others down on a table and look at Jesus and say, well, what do you make of this? And listen for what he has to say. Because most often, if we sit with the presence of Jesus and our condemnations, what we're going to discover is that our condemnation is usually a form of projection, isn't it? In other words, the things that are broken inside of us that we don't want to have to deal with, that we want to evade, if we can just find faults in others, well, that's my exit ramp to have to deal with my own brokenness. And Jesus says, no. This is not how it works. First, you focus on yourself. Then you bring that condemnation to me, and we sit together. And you let me begin to heal your projection. And the more you engage this, the more you do this with Jesus, over time you make eventually become the kind of person who's capable of confronting sin without condemning others. Because this is what Jesus does. If we look at John chapter 8, he's here with the woman who's caught in adultery, and it says that Jesus straightened up and asked her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you. Jesus declared, go now and leave your life of sin. So can you see the thing here? He's almost asking her, put your condemnation before me, because the people who've brought you to me and have condemned you, they're not here. They're not willing to look at what the condemnation is. I mean, and if you know the story, they're caught in adultery. Well, how did they know that she was in adultery? She was about to commit adultery. What were they doing there? Where were they? What was their part of the story? Okay, so it wasn't just like, oh well, here she is. There is the other side of the story. And so Jesus says, well, they're not willing to put the condemnation here. They're just wanting to condemn you, but they're not willing to talk about it. And so where are they? And if no one has done that, then neither do I condemn you. And he says to her, go now and leave your life of sin. See, he names it, he confronts it, he addresses her sin, but he doesn't condemn her. Isn't that beautiful? Right? He doesn't condemn her. I think this is such a delicate fine line to walk, and it's so easy to get that wrong. And we probably need to see it done well. We need to see Jesus do this with us over and over and over before we possess the kind of maturity we're capable of doing this with another person. Jesus calls forth the goodness that he sees. He calls forth the goodness that he sees in me, in you, in us. And he confronts us without condemning. And when you see that, and you receive that again and again from Jesus, and you've done your work to focus on your own beam, to allow Jesus to heal your projection, you may possibly join Jesus in becoming the kind of person who's mature enough to confront without condemning. So there you have it, guys. Nice, short, and sweet. Do not judge, or you too will be judged in its context. And may this be true of you, may it be true of me, and may we be able to walk out this week, this text in our lives. And so there are some discussion questions for you to look at, or in a small group, or with your spouse. What was your biggest takeaway from the teaching? What are some of the most common judgments, condemnation you catch yourself harboring towards others? If it's true that the things we find most irritating in others are often a reflection of what is most broken in ourselves, what are your most common judgment or condemnation reveals about what needs to be healed in you? This is very much reminds me of when you point fingers at someone, look how many fingers are pointing at you. Have you experienced the gift of being confronted without being condemned? What did that look like? How did that impact you? And so next week we are in the final lecture 6. And often during Holy Week, people all over the world remember Jesus' words on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, did God really abandon Jesus on the cross? Or was Jesus quoting the specific words at this specific moment for a specific reason? In this final lecture of Stripped of Context, we're going to unpack Jesus' use of this rabbinical technique called remez. And if you've been long enough with me in my lectures, you would know what remez means. If not, we will explore it. And we'll look at this technique called remez to make a bold claim about the supremacy and the supreme confidence in God's faithfulness. And I pray and hope that once you understand the context of these powerful words, my God, why have you forsaken me? That you will be inspired by the knowledge that even if in our darkest moment, God doesn't leave us or abandon us. So there you go, guys. This was lecture 5, nice and shorter than the last one. Any questions, any observations that you'd like to make?
No, I don't have any, Lakai.
Okay,
Thank you
anyone
very
else?
much indeed.
Okay, anyone else?
No, not from me. Thanks, Lakai, but I really enjoyed that session. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, guys. So what I'll do is always, I will send the recording, I will send the lecture notes, and as I said, next week we will be our last lecture. Then I'm going to take some time off from lecturing online, and I will let you know when we will start again. And I'll definitely keep in contact with you if you're going to want to join the next lot of lectures after a bit of a break. So be blessed. And yeah, I would really suggest, encourage you to go through the notes, go through this lecture again, and allow that to, Charlene, sorry, you've got your hand up.
No, I just want to thank you.
Oh, okay. No, you're welcome. You are very, very welcome. And I hope one day you're going to visit your sister and then you can come and visit us.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. That sounds good. All right, guys, may you be blessed and may you walk this scripture in your life this week. God bless.
Thank you,
God bless
Lakai.
you. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Lakai.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.